Hello and welcome back to my channel. Because I read quite a few books in January, I decided to split my wrap up into two, and I think I'll continue wrapping up the books as I read them, sort of 5-6 at a time rather than doing a monthly wrap up. Especially, when I read quite a few books in a month, it just seems a bit daunting to me to wrap up all the books at the same time. So yeah, we're going to continue with wrapping up 5-6 books each time, just for the time being, and see how we go. So the first book I want to talk about today is Where Angels Fear to Tread by E.M. Forster. This is the first book I read for the E.M. Forster read-along, which is hosted by Jen the Librarian, where we will read all of E.M. Forster's novels in publication order. So this is obviously his debut novel. So at the start of the book we meet Lilia, who is a recently widowed woman, and she's about to travel to Italy with her friend, and she's seen off at the station by her family-in-law. They are seemingly very concerned with her, but we soon learn it is not so much concern about Lydia's welfare, but more how Lydia's trip to Italy will or might be a cause for embarrassment to the family. It soon becomes apparent that Lydia is definitely the black sheep of the family. They take care of her daughter Irma when she's away, but again, it doesn't seem to be done out of genuine care, but more from a desire to raise their granddaughter in their family values. So in Italy, Lilia meets a man named Gino, and they want to get married. Her in-laws obviously do not like this, and they send Philip, her brother-in-law, to stop this marriage. So that is the basic setup of this story. And I really like the start of the book. It's really quite funny and observant and quick-witted in tone. But it also has this sort of serious undertone, and it touches on some serious topics. With the way the family tries to control Lilia. And I was quite happy to be exploring this dynamic of this family. But then a couple of times throughout the book, just seemingly out of nowhere, these quite dark, violent moments would happen, and they just completely caught me off guard, and would drastically change the direction the story was going in, or at least I thought it was going in. And I think it's fine to have plot twists in a story, but they really snapped me out of the story, and it took me a minute to get back into the pace again. And this would happen on a number of occasions, and I ended up feeling really confused about what the author wanted to do with this book. I think this book consists of some really great parts, but I just don't quite follow how we got from one part to the next. There's a few interesting ideas to be explored in this book, but to me it lacked this focus, and it made it hard for me to really grasp these ideas. So yeah, I'm very curious to see how other people fare with this book who joined the read-along. I've seen Greg of Supposedly Fun talk about it, and he mentions how he could see some elements of this book will come back in Forster's later work. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that part. So yeah, I wasn't a huge fan of this, but it does show some potential for his later work. Then I read In the Kitchen, edited by Bowi van Onna, which are all essays on food and cooking. So these authors all have a very strong connection to food and cooking, be it professionally or personally, and I really enjoyed how varied these essays were. I was expecting these essays all to be about what role food played in these writers' lives, which it was in a way, but they all took their individual approach. There was an essay that compared working as a chef to working as a publisher, because you're both working with people's tastes and catering them with flavors they are familiar with, but also wanting them to try new things. There was an essay on how millennials try to create this illusion of upward mobility with their taste in food. There was one author who talked about her experience working in the food industry, but at the same time also having an eating disorder. One essay talked about the consequences of the COVID pandemic on her work in a renowned restaurant and how they cope with that. So yeah, a lot of different approaches they took with these essays. Obviously I liked some of them more than others, but overall they definitely surprised me with how broadly they tackled the topic of food and eating and cooking. Next is Kitchen by Banana Yoshimoto. This is translated from the Japanese by Megan Buckus. It was originally published in 1988 and the English translation is from 1993. And this is actually two thematically linked short stories. The titular Kitchen, and then the second shorter story is called Moonlight Shadow. Kitchen is about a young woman called Mikaje. She was raised by her grandmother since her parents both died when she was really young, and in the beginning of the book her grandmother had just passed away, and she is taken in by a young man who worked at her grandmother's favorite flower shop and his mother, and they take care of her when she's grieving her grandmother. And then the second story, Moonlight Shadow, is also about a young woman who has lost someone recently. In this case her boyfriend died in a car crash, and she encounters a stranger who helps her with her grief. So both these stories are about grief, obviously, and trying to find your footing in that initial stage when you just lost someone, and you have to figure out your life and yourself without that person in it. It's a book about love, about loss, about loneliness. So it's a very sad and mournful book, but in a more quiet and gentle way. It feels very realistic the way these characters move through their grief and their sadness. It does have this typical Japanese feel to it, which I'm not quite able to put into words what that is. I enjoyed the writing style because it's both quite earnest, but also a little bit innocent and charming in a way. I liked the second story more than I did the first, because the second was a little bit more focused to me, whereas the first meandered a little bit more. And then the second story also had this tiny touch of magical realism in it that I really enjoyed. One thing I have to mention as well is that there is a transgender character in the first story, and she gets misgendered a couple of times, which I think is something you should be aware of before you get into this book. Obviously this book is 30 years old, so part of it is obviously the time it is set in, but I also wonder if it might have to do something with the translation. because I don't really know how gender and pronouns and things like that work in the original Japanese language. But yeah, that's just something to be aware of. Yeah, I'm noticing I'm finding it a little bit hard to put into words what I thought of this book. I'm going to meet up with 2 Bookstore Clem friends, Suze and Puck, and maybe when this video comes out I've already met them. But we decided to do a little impromptu book meeting about this book. So it'll be nice to share my thoughts with them and see what they think about it. I feel like they are both very eloquent in talking about books. So I am definitely looking forward to talking to them about this book. Then I read Zo doen Vogelstad by Jennifer Ackerman. This is the Dutch translation of The Bird's Way. And this is a book all about the behaviors of birds. So the way birds communicate with each other through birdsong, but also through their behavior and their appearance. She talks about the way birds gather their food and build their nests. There's a chapter on play in birds. There's a chapter on how birds seduce and select their mates, and how they raise their young. I enjoyed it a lot. I learned a lot of new things about birds that I didn't know before. I liked how the author explained that a lot of studies that are done on birds until recently have often been done in the Northern Hemisphere, but that the behavior of birds can be a lot more diverse if you take in account birds from all over the world, and how that has recently changed the view on birds a lot. After reading this book, I definitely feel that birds are more interesting and intelligent than I had assumed before. I haven't read many books on birds before, so I can't really compare it. But yeah, I do think that this is a good place to start if you are interested in the topic. I also read this poetry collection, toch, maar, which translates as Do It Anyway by Bab Schons. She's a Dutch black spoken word artist. I really enjoyed this. I watched some videos of these poems performed out loud, which is the way they are meant to be heard, but they do come off the page really well as well. She tackles some serious topics in this, things like racism, activism, her poems about her experience as a black woman, her experience as a mother. There's a poem on Toni Morrison in this, and it's clear that she has written a lot of these poems as a reaction to certain events going on in the world and issues that are current in society. It's a very accessible collection. So I think it's very well done, and I think it's a good place to start with poetry if you're not very well versed in the genre like I am. And then the last book I want to discuss today is The Road Home by Tremain. And I haven't had such an up and down reading experience throughout a single book like I had with this one. This literally went from 5 stars to 4 stars to 1 star to 2 or 3 stars. So the basic premise of this book is that we have this man called Lev. He is from an unnamed Eastern European country, and he moves to the UK as a migrant labourer. He's a single father and he's been struggling to find work in his home country. So he tries to find work in the UK so he can send money home to provide for his family. The first few chapters of this I absolutely loved. I was really impressed with Tremain's writing style, and I thought the way she introduced Lev as the main character was just really incredible. The way she set up the story and how we learned a bit about his past, a bit about his character and his motives, and you know where he's going. I thought that was really well done, and I was all like, great, 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 this is going to be a favorite book. But then as I was getting a little bit further into the story, there was just a few small things that started to grate a little bit on me. I think it was mainly because the author, as a you know, quite privileged, well-educated white woman, was writing about a migrant laborer, which is, you know, obviously very far removed from her own experience. I just felt like the main character was a bit unrealistic. I kept on thinking he felt very much like a character in a book, rather than a real person, you know, which is a bit of a silly comment because he is a character in a book. You know, this is not a biography. So yeah, I was still very much invested in the story, and enjoying it a lot, but that was just something that was nagging in the back of my mind. But then about in the middle of the story, there was 3 things that I really didn't like, and to me the book really took a dive at that point, and I did consider abandoning the book just then. I'll try and talk about these things without spoiling it too much. One is that at some point the character goes to see a play, and that scene was honestly one of the most boring writing I have ever read. And you know, I like books where not much happens, but the author just described what was happening in the play, the main character's reaction to it, and what the audience was doing, and it was so boring, and this went on and on and on. I just didn't get it, you know. If you let a character see a play or a movie or something in a book, you do not have to go through it scene by scene. So yeah, that was one thing. Another thing was that there are 2 Chinese characters that play a small part in this book, and they are depicted so stereotypically and so racist. You know, she really has them speaking with you know, the L's switching out for R's, and I was like, really, you know, you can do better than that. And then the third thing, which was what bothered me the most, and maybe we get into spoilers a little bit here, so I'll put something in the screen so you can see when I finish talking about it. So the main character on 2 separate occasions abuses the woman he's dating. The first time he chokes her, and the second time he sexually assaults her. And it's not so much the fact that that happened that I hate it. It is the fact that it has so little consequence. Well, it has consequences, but the way the author writes about it, she expects you to feel sorry for the main character, and you have to feel bad for him because of these consequences. And you know, you're supposed to still feel sympathetic for him in the rest of the book. And yeah, that just made me really angry. And at that point, I really was about ready to DNF this book. I decided to continue reading in the end because I did love the first part a lot, and I was hoping it would redeem itself a little bit. And it did get a little bit more interesting after that. I especially enjoyed some of the side characters. They were some really fun and interesting people to read about. I do think the author still is really good at setting a scene. You know, there were quite a few scenes written about food and cooking that I really enjoyed. But yeah, it just never really picked up again, and I can't completely forgive it for what happened in the middle. So yeah, a very mixed reading experience with this one, and I'm very curious to hear if anyone else has read this book and what they thought about this. So that's it, that's all the books I wanted to talk about today. As always, if you have any thoughts or comments about the books I read, please let me know, and let me know what you think about this format of wrapping up books and talking about them in chunks of 5 or 6 books rather than doing a monthly wrap-up. And yeah, that's it for today. I'll talk to you in the next video. Bye bye.